What's up everyone, Lily here. Today let's do a full reading passage together. So this passage of plant scent is quite difficult. It has a lot of difficult vocabulary that I don't know. Let's see if not knowing some words will prevent us from getting the correct answers. If you have watched my last reading video, you will know that in order to finish all these questions in around 20 minutes, it's best not to answer them one by one. Because if you first do matching information, which would require us to read all these paragraphs and then move on to do true, false, not given, you will read at least some of these paragraphs again, right? So in order to save time, it's best to answer all the types of questions at once. So the first thing I would do is to read the title of the passage, Plant Scent. So now I know this passage is about the smell of plants. And then I would quickly go through all the question types. So we have matching information, which paragraph contains the following information. And then we have true, false, not given questions. Finally, we have multiple choice questions. This gives me an idea of the types of question I need to deal with. Next, I wouldn't just go ahead and start reading the passage. I would read the questions first, so that when I'm reading the passage, I will have goals in mind. I will know the information I will be looking for. So for matching information, I would quickly go through these 4 pieces of information and identify some keywords to help myself locate the answers in the passage. I wouldn't read all this information very carefully because I wouldn't be able to remember it. I will just try to identify some keywords here. So 27, plant scent attracts this guy's enemy for protection. I don't know what this word means, but this is definitely an unusual word. So I highlighted it to help myself locate the answer in the passage. Practice on genetic experiment of fragrance. I think a genetic experiment is a very important phrase because this whole passage is about scents, it's about fragrance, right? So fragrance is definitely nothing interesting here. So I will just use genetic experiment to help myself locate the answer in the passage. Next, there is more than one way for plants to be pollinated. I can't find any important word here. It doesn't matter. I will just move on. Genetic engineering can help plants to attract specific pollinators. I think this sentence is about genetic engineering, so I'm going to highlight it. Next, I wouldn't just start reading the passage, I would continue to read the questions because 31 may appear at the very beginning of the passage. I don't want to read the passage twice, so let me read 31. We have little evidence to support the idea that scent attracts pollinators. So we need to find out if there is evidence to support that scent attracts pollinators. I would also read the first multiple choice question because, again, it may appear in the first paragraph. I don't want to read a paragraph twice. How do wasps protect plants when they are attracted by scents, according to the passage? I don't know what this word means, but this is definitely an unusual word, so I will use this to locate the answer in the passage. I wouldn't read the options because I wouldn't be able to remember so much information. Now, let me start reading the passage. So this is the last passage of the reading test, and the last one is usually the most difficult one. So for a difficult passage, I wouldn't read it very fast because I want to get a general idea of what each paragraph is about. It will help me understand better the sentences that contain answers. And when reading, I will try to look for those keywords I have just highlighted. So as I read the passage, I soon noticed that here it mentions scents help the plants to attract pollinators. Maybe the answer to 31 is here. So now I will read 31 again because I already forget what it is about. We have little evidence to support the idea that scent attracts pollinators. Now I'm going to read this part very carefully. Many people have heard that scents help the plants to attract pollinators. So this part is talking about scent attract pollinators, right? Now we need to find out if this idea is supported by little evidence or not. So even though this widely held idea is mostly correct, Okay, this idea is mostly correct. It's surprising to know how little scientific proof of it exists. I think it's pretty obvious that 31 is true. You see, this is why we need to do all the types of questions together. If you first try to find out if paragraph A contains any of these pieces of information, when you do 31, you will have to read paragraph A again. So definitely do all the types of questions together. Next, before I start reading the rest of the paragraph, I would first read 32 because 32 may appear right after 31 in the first paragraph, right? These guys, I don't know what they are. It doesn't matter. These guys won't eat those tobacco leaves on which they laid eggs. Well, I think these guys are definitely unusual, so I will use this phrase to locate the answer. Now, let's continue to read paragraph A, and keep in mind that we need to look for the keywords that we have highlighted. If you forget those keywords, just quickly go through them. It will take you a few seconds to go through them, so don't worry. If you forget them, just spend a few seconds quickly going through them. Alright, as I read it, I noticed that it seems this part is talking about 29. There is more than one way for plants to pollinate it. Now I'm going to read it very carefully and see if this is the answer to 29. It is important to note that not all flowers are pollinated by biological agents. Many grasses are pollinated by the wind. So basically this part talks about how plants are pollinated, right? We don't need to know what biological agents are. We just need to know this is one way to be pollinated, and the wind is another way to be pollinated. So there is actually more than one way for plants to be pollinated. So now I'm pretty sure the answer to question 29 is paragraph A. Now, let's read the rest of the paragraph, and when I'm reading, I will try to look for these guys and wasps. You can pause the video and read it. I don't think it mentions these guys. I don't think it mentions wasps either. Now we can move on to paragraph B. Again, read with goals in mind. When you read, try to look for those keywords you've highlighted. So as I read it, I found that here it mentions these guys. Let's see, 32. These guys won't eat those tobacco leaves on which they laid eggs. So now I'm going to read this sentence very carefully. These emissions discourage females of the moths. Oh, okay. These guys are a type of insect called the moths. So these emissions discourage females of the moths from laying their eggs on wounded tobacco plants. So after reading this sentence, I can't find the answer to 32. It's normal. So what I would do is to go back a little. I would read the previous sentences to help me better understand this sentence. You don't need to worry about running out of time because if you do all the question types together, you probably will be able to finish the first passage, which is usually the easiest one, in like 15 minutes. That means you will have more time to spend on difficult passages. So don't worry about reading some parts of the passage twice. Now let's read it. Many plants other than pine trees emit something when injured, and in some cases, this emission serves as a signal to help protect the plants. So basically, this part is saying that many plants emit something to protect themselves when they are injured, right? Now let's continue to read. This stuff known scientifically as blah blah blah, whatever. So this stuff is emitted by numerous plant species when those species are injured. So this sentence is saying that many plants emit this stuff when they are injured. So these two sentences say nothing about these guys, right? But reading them can help us better understand the sentence that contains the answer. These emissions discourage females of the moths. So these emissions refer to the emissions emitted by injured plants. These emissions discourage females of the moths from laying their eggs on wounded tobacco plants. So because of the emissions, the moths won't lay their eggs on wounded tobacco plants. So the mouse won't lay their eggs on tobacco plants, but does it say whether the mouse will eat those tobacco leaves or not? So I think the key word here is eat. From this sentence, we don't know if the mouse will eat those tobacco leaves or not. This sentence only tells us that the mouse won't lay their eggs on tobacco plants, but we don't know whether they will eat those plants or not. So I think the answer is not given. But of course, I will read the rest of the paragraph just to make sure the answer is not given. Okay, the rest of the paragraph is irrelevant. It doesn't talk about these guys anymore. And don't forget that we need to see if this paragraph contains any of these three pieces of information. I don't think paragraph B mentions this guy. What about genetic experiment? I don't think it mentions it. And what about genetic engineering? I don't think it mentions it either. So paragraph B doesn't contain any of these pieces of information. Now, before moving on to paragraph C, let's read 33 first. Certain ants are attracted by this stuff to guard plants in the rainforests. I think this question is about ants, and I think we can also use rainforest to locate the answer. So, when reading paragraph C, we need to look for ants, rainforests, wasps, this guy, genetic experiment, and genetic engineering. Now let's read paragraph C. Oh, as you can see, the first word is this guy. So let me read it carefully and see if I can find the answer to 27. You guys can pause the video and read this part. So basically, this part is saying plants have an indirect defense system. They emit this stuff when insects are eating them. So they emit something when insects are eating them, but also from non-damaged parts of the plant. So non-damaged parts of the plant also emit this stuff to protect themselves. I think this is the indirect defense system the first sentence is talking about. So I understand what this part means, but I'm not sure if this part mentions the plant scent attracts this guy's enemy for protection, because only the first sentence mentions this guy, and I'm not sure if the remaining sentences are still about this guy. So I will just move on. I don't want to waste my time on one single question. Now let me continue to read. So as I read it, I noticed that it mentions wasps. Let's see, 36. How do wasps protect plants when they are attracted by scents, according to the passage? Now let me read it carefully and see if I can find out how wasps protect plants. Some wasps can detect the volatile signature of a damaged plant. I don't know what volatile means exactly, but I do know that volatiles are something that plants emit to protect themselves. So I think this part of the sentence is about wasps being attracted by scents. Now let's continue to read. So some wasps can detect the volatile signature of a damaged plant and will lay their eggs inside the offending caterpillar. Okay, so wasps lay their eggs inside the offending caterpillar. Eventually, the wasp's eggs hatch and the emerging babies feed on the caterpillar from the inside out. So the wasp's babies will eat the caterpillar from the inside out. The growth of infected caterpillars is retarded considerably to the benefit of the plant. I don't know what retarded means, but I think the growth of the infected caterpillars has been stopped because here it says to the benefit of the plant. Now let's read the options. Plants induce wasps to prey on this guy. Does this part even mention this guy? I don't think so. B. Wasps lay eggs into caterpillars. I think this is the correct answer because here it says wasps lay their eggs inside a offending caterpillar. I think here inside means into caterpillars. I think B is the correct answer, but let's read the remaining two options. To deter plant-eating creatures, wasps lay their eggs onto the plant. So do wasps lay their eggs onto the plant or into caterpillars? I think it's pretty obvious that they lay their eggs inside, meaning into the caterpillars. So C is obviously wrong. Now D, there is a harmonious coexistence between offending caterpillars and the wasp eggs. Does it mention coexistence? I don't think so. Anyway, I think it's pretty obvious that B is the correct answer. Wasps lay their eggs inside into the offending caterpillar. Now, before we read the rest of the paragraph, let's read the 37 first so that when it appears in the passage, we won't miss it. What reason caused the decline of the number of honeybees in the United States? I think it's pretty obvious that this question is about honeybees in the United States. Now let's continue our reading. So as I read it, I noticed that here it mentions this guy. You see, this guy. So now let me read it carefully and see if it contains the information that plant scent attracts this guy's enemy for protection. So volatiles released by plants. I think by far you should have a general idea of what volatiles are. Volatiles have appeared in the passage many times now. From the context, we can know that volatiles are a type of scent that plants emit to protect themselves, right? So volatiles released by plants in response to this guy's egg laying can attract parasites of the eggs, thereby preventing the eggs from hatching and avoiding what of hungry these guys that would have emerged. So the eggs won't hatch and the hungry babies won't come out. So IELTS often uses synonyms to test us. I think here parasites is a synonym of enemy. Because here it says preventing the eggs from hatching. So what prevent the eggs from hatching? Parasites prevent the eggs from hatching. So the eggs won't hatch and the hungry babies won't come out to eat the plant. Therefore, parasites are this guy's enemy. So I think paragraph C does contain this piece of information. So I think the correct answer is C. Now let's continue our reading, and we need to look for genetic experiment, genetic engineering, ants, rainforest, and honeybees in the United States. So as I read, I noticed that here it mentions rainforest and ants. Let me read it carefully and see if I can find the answer to 33. Certain ants are attracted by volatiles to guard plants in the rainforests. So ants of this type of species, I think it means certain ants. So certain ants patrol young leaves and attack any insects that they encounter. So certain ants patrol young leaves of the tree, because here it mentions tree, young leaves of the tree, and attack any insect they encounter. Okay, the young leaves emit high levels of the volatile. So the young leaves emit a kind of volatile, which is a compound that the ants use either as wood or as wood in their nests. So the ants actually need the compound, need the volatiles in their nests. That means the ants are attracted by volatiles, right? What about guard plants? I think they do guard plants. They do protect plants, because here it says the ants patrol young leaves of the tree. They patrol young leaves of the plant and attack any insect they encounter. So I think a guard is a synonym of patrol. But let's read the last sentence. It appears that the compound is both an attractant and a reward offered by the tree to get the ants perform this valuable deterrent role. I think a deterrent means something like keeping insect away. You can say guard is a synonym of patrol. You can also say guard is a synonym of deterrent role. So yes, the answer is true. I think 33 is all about synonyms. Certain ants is a synonym of this part, right? And from here, we know that those ants are attracted by volatiles, and the guard is a synonym of patrol and deterrent role. So yeah, I'm pretty sure the answer is true. Now let's move on to paragraph D, but of course we need to first read 34. Vegetables can be pollinated by means other than floral scents. I think this question is about vegetables, and I think floral means something like a flower scent. Now let's read paragraph D. As you can see, the first word is floral scent. But does it mention vegetables? This part doesn't mention vegetables. So basically this part says many plants depend on floral scents to be pollinated. But it immediately mentions vegetables here. So let's read it carefully and see if we can find out whether vegetables can be pollinated by means other than floral scent or not. Vegetables and tropical plants depend on floral scents to attract pollination. So far it hasn't mentioned other means of pollination. The only means of pollination it mentions is floral scent. But let's continue to read and see if it mentions other means of pollination or not. Not only does pollination impact crop yield, it also affects the quality and efficiency of crop production. So this sentence doesn't mention other means of pollination either. This sentence is about why pollination is important. It doesn't mention other means of pollination. Now let's continue to read. Most crops need most, if not all, wood to be fertilized to ensure the optimum size and shape of the fruit that results. I don't know what this word means, but it's pretty obvious this sentence is not about other means of pollination, right? And you can pause the video and read this part quickly. This part is about why fragrance, why scent is important. It's not about other means of pollination. And the rest of the paragraph talks about honeybees in the United States. It's about question 37. So I'm pretty sure the answer to 34 is not given. The paragraph doesn't mention other means to be pollinated. The only means of pollination it mentions is floral scent. That's why the answer is not given. Now we already know this part is about question 37. What reason caused the decline of the number of honeybees in the United States? Let's read it carefully and find the reason. Recent disease epidemics have killed many honeybees, the major insect pollinators in the United States. So, recent disease epidemics have killed many honeybees, and this has compounded pollination efforts in many areas. So, what killed many honeybees? What caused the decline of the number of honeybees? The answer is disease epidemics. It's pretty obvious. The answer is B, spread of illness. Because illness is a synonym of disease, and the spread is a synonym of epidemics. 37 is easy. It's pretty obvious. The answer is B, spread of illness. So we've finished reading paragraph D. Don't forget the remaining two matching questions. So this paragraph doesn't talk about genetic experiment, and I think it doesn't mention genetic engineering either. So now we can move on to paragraph E. But of course, we need to read 35 and 38 first. So 35. The insects are able to locate flowers with the help of artificial volatile compounds. I think artificial is a very important word because so far the passage has been about natural scent, natural volatiles, right? But 35 is about artificial volatiles. And 38, which of the following drawbacks about artificial fragrance is not mentioned in the passage? Oh, this is also about artificial fragrance, artificial scent. So when reading, I will try to look for information about artificial scent or artificial fragrance. As I read it, I noticed that here it mentions scent compounds. I think these are artificial scent compounds because it uses the verb spray. If it were natural scent, farmers wouldn't need to spray it on trees because trees naturally emit natural scent. Besides, here it mentions artificial compounds. And if you read this part, you will know that the artificial compounds mentioned here refer to the compounds here. So this must be artificial compounds. So let me start reading carefully. Some farmers have attempted to enhance honeybee wood by spraying scent compounds on trees, but this approach was costly. Okay, let's see if it mentions costly. As you can see, option A says expensive. It's very expensive. So A is definitely the wrong answer because we need to choose an option that is not mentioned in the passage. So it mentions expensive, had to be repeated. Let's see if any of the option talks about being repeated. it can't tell correct information to pollinators. It requires specially designed equipment. It poisons the local environment. No. Let's continue. Had potentially toxic effects on the soil or local whatever. I think this is about the local environment. It poisons the local environment. So it mentions option D. So D is not the answer. Let's continue. And in the end, proved to be inefficient. So why is it inefficient? The poor effectiveness of this strategy probably reflects limitations of the artificial compounds, which clearly fail to convey the appropriate message to the bees. So I think this is about can't tell correct information to pollinators. Bees are the pollinators, right? It's failed to convey the message. It can't tell correct information to pollinators. So I think it mentions B. But let's continue to read a little. For example, general spraying of the volatile mixture cannot tell the insects where exactly the flowers are. So insects are pollinators, right? The mixture, the volatile mixture, the volatile compounds cannot tell the pollinators where exactly the flowers are. This is exactly what option B says. So I think C is the correct answer. The passage doesn't mention C. And don't forget that 35 is also about artificial volatiles, artificial compounds. The insects are able to locate flowers with the help of artificial volatile compounds. If you understand this example, you will know the answer is false, because the example says the volatile mixture, the volatile compound, cannot tell the insects where exactly the flowers are. That means the insect cannot locate the flowers with the help of artificial compounds. But 35 says the opposite. It says the insects are able to, but the fact is that they cannot locate flowers with the help of artificial compounds. So the answer is false. So the difference between a false statement and a not given statement is that when a statement is false, it says something completely opposite to the passage. The passage says the insects cannot locate flowers, but the statement says they can locate flowers. That's why this is false. Whereas for a not given statement, we cannot find information in the passage. The passage doesn't even talk about other means of pollination. The only means of pollination it talks about is flower scent, right? It doesn't mention other means. That is why 34 is not given. The same is true of 32. The passage doesn't talk about these guys eating tobacco leaves. The passage only talks about these guys laying eggs on tobacco leaves. It doesn't even mention eating. That's why the answer is not given. So we've finished all the true false not given questions. We have 2 matching questions left, and we also have 2 multiple choice questions left. Before we continue our reading, let's read 39 first. The number of $30 billion quoted in the passage is to illustrate the fact that apparently we should use this number to locate the answer. Now let's continue our reading. As you can see, here it mentions genetic engineering. Let's see if it's about how genetic engineering can help plants to attract specific pollinators. So this part of the paragraph is about how farmers are trying to solve the problem of plants not being able to pollinate properly. However, the methods they come up with don't work. So clearly, a more refined strategy is needed. The ability to enhance existing floral scent, create a scent, whatever, or change the characteristics of the scent, which could all be accomplished by genetic engineering. So genetic engineering can enhance existing floral scent and do other things, which would allow us to manipulate the types of insect pollinators and the frequency of their visits. I think manipulate the types of insect pollinators mean exactly the same as attract specific pollinators. So I think paragraph E is the correct answer. Now let's move on to paragraph F and see if it mentions a genetic experiment and $30 billion. As you can see here, it mentions $30 billion. But if you just read this sentence, you probably can't find the correct answer because you probably don't know what this word means. So if you don't understand the previous sentences very well, you may want to go back a little and read those sentences again. So these things are things like cut flowers and potted plants. So cut flowers and potted plants play an important role in human life. However, unfortunately, during shipping, their desirable perfumes, their desirable scent is lost. The loss of scent among these things, which have a worldwide value of more than $30 billion, makes them important targets for the genetic manipulation of flower fragrance. Now let's read the options. Favorable perfumes are made from this type of flowers. So even though here it mentions perfumes, but here perfumes means scent, right? Whereas in option A, perfumes are the liquid that we spray on our bodies. So the two perfumes actually don't mean the same, so A is obviously wrong. B, the cultivation of flowers needs to step out of its traditional ways. This paragraph is not about the cultivation of flowers. This paragraph is about these things, and these things are cut flowers and the potted plants. So B is definitely wrong. I actually chose the wrong answer. I chose C, but C is not the correct answer. Genetically modified aromas make for a profitable industry. On reflection, I think profitable is the wrong word here, because here it says this industry, which have a worldwide value of more than $30 billion. So this is a very valuable industry, right? But being valuable isn't equal to being profitable. For example, Uber is a very valuable company. It has a market valuation of like tens of billions of dollars. However, Uber is not profitable yet. It's operated at a loss. Profitable just doesn't mean valuable. That's why C is the wrong answer. And D is the only option that I can't prove wrong. I actually don't understand why D is correct. I understand why the other three options are wrong, but I don't understand why D is correct. Maybe we can tell from the context that scent plays a significant role in this industry, but I'm not sure if this is a fact. So if you know why this is a fact, please let me know in the comment below. Now let's read the last question. What is the weakness of genetic experiment on fragrance? Now let's continue our reading. As you can see, here it mentions experiments. And I think these experiments are genetic experiments because here it says gene. Let me read it carefully and see if I can find the answer to 28 or 30. So some work has already begun in this area. What area? This area refers to the area of the genetic manipulation of flower fragrance, right? I think this is just a type of genetic experiment. So some work has already begun, as several groups have created these plants that express the gene from what? There are a lot of words that I don't know, but it doesn't matter. All I need to know is that this part is about genetic experiment, and they have already begun conducting genetic experiment, right? Some work has already begun. I think this is about 28, practice on genetics experiment of fragrance. Here, practice means carry out or conducting, carrying out or conducting genetic experiment of fragrance. Yes, they have already began carrying out genetic experiment. So the answer is, this is F, paragraph F. Now we have only one question left. Maybe the answer will just be here because this question is also about genetic experiment. Let's continue our reading. I think this sentence is talking about one of the weaknesses of genetic experiments. Let me read it carefully. For technical reasons, the gene was expressed everywhere in the plant, and although the transgenic plants did create small amounts of, maybe this is a type of scent, I don't know. So maybe the plants created in genetic experiment did create small amounts of scent. The level was below the threshold of detection of the human nose. Yeah, I think this is exactly what option A means. The level of this stuff is too low to be smelled by nose. Yes, option A is correct. the amount is very small. It's below the threshold of detection for the human nose, so it's pretty obvious A is the correct answer. So we've finished the entire reading passage. The key here is to do all three types of questions at the same time. If you do them one by one, you probably will run out of time. And don't be afraid of those unknown words. Many of them are just irrelevant to finding out the correct answers. And for those unknown words that do matter, we probably just can guess their meanings based on the context. So that's it for this video. If you find this helpful, please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing. Thank you guys so much for watching. I will see you soon.